They inform me that this will not amplify, but they are recording with it, and that's the reason we're holding it. I want to thank you for coming. My name is David Gibbs, and I have the privilege of being the president of the Christian Law Association. And people ask me all the time, how'd you get to be president? Well, when we founded it, there was nobody else there. So I had the opportunity to take any position I wanted, and that's the one I took and have now held for 43 years. And so we have the opportunity to defend churches all across the country. There's never a time that we don't have matters ongoing in all 50 states. And one of the issues that has become extraordinarily sensitive now for a long period of time, but is heightening in its sensitivity and difficulty, is the tax exemption of churches. Now, I want to be very clear up front. We're not going to comprehensively cover the tax exemption issue. Our ministry puts out a book on this. I will be happy to give it to you for free. If you will give Brother Steve Kluth in the back a tract or something that has your name, address, and zip code on it, and we will mail it to you. Hold your hand up, Brother Steve, so they know who you are, and we'll make sure if you'll just give that to them, and that will take you through all of the points. We are going to deal with some of the most sensitive things that have happened recently. Let's start with a word of prayer, and then we'll begin. Father, thank you for this day. What an honor, what a privilege to serve you. You don't need us. You're God. You're all powerful. But you privilege us to have the opportunity to serve you. Now help us to do things decently and in order. Help us to protect with wisdom our ministries. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let me explain why tax exemption has become such an issue. Number one, the governments, state, local, federal, are out of money. And they're looking for means by which to get more money. And one of the areas that Ronald Reagan found in 1980 was he said, we think there are all kinds of tax-exempt entities not paying taxes who ought to be paying taxes. And all of the people said, yeah, that's right, man. If people aren't paying taxes who are supposed to, never realizing the largest group in that is churches. And so the issue is, do we have to pay taxes, especially since they're interested in revenue? The second issue is there has been a huge shift in the country. Back in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, the thought was churches should not pay taxes. But now that the churches look so prosperous and have so much, there has been a shift in the country. And we are right at just under 80% in all the polls say churches should pay taxes. Here's the dilemma. If your church gets taxed and you lose your tax-exempt status, highly probable you will not financially survive. This is a very rough estimate, but I want to give it to you. If you lose your tax-exempt status, your ministry will owe just over a third of all of its revenue to the government. So you will have a new line item for taxes. Now, for some it'll be higher, for some it'll be lower, but you can average just about 1/3 of every penny that comes in, however it comes, would be absorbed in a tax structure. So financially, very, very hard to survive when we lose our tax exemption. There's a second major problem. When you lose your tax exemption, you don't lose it and start paying taxes today from here forward. They have the right to go back, depending on how you were doing things, and they always go back 5 years. And they can go back way more than that. And so all of a sudden you say, we're going to have enormous trouble paying these taxes from here forward. But if we have to come up with the money to go backwards and pick up these taxes, that's huge. You not only owe them the taxes, you owe the interest and the penalties. If you were operating as tax exempt and they find out that you truly weren't, you owe the government an awful lot of money. Very few ministries in our experience can survive that. That loss, having to start to pay from here forward, but really coming up with all the money on the arrearages is just too much. And the only way most ministries can do it is to start selling assets. And the property is the main asset. So tax exemption is an incredibly serious issue. Third thing happens when you lose your tax exemption. They have the right to come in and say, we're the people in authority, the pastor, the deacons, the elders, the trustees. We're these people being willfully negligent. And can they be held personally responsible? There is a side to this that is very bad. And that is if they find that the people in charge, the people with authority, were not taking care on this, they can come in and create a lot of grief saying, now these people may owe some things personally in regard to this indebtedness. And so I tell everybody, tax exemption's incredibly serious. It's not something you ever want to have jeopardized, and it's something that you want to make sure that you have it right so that you can't ever lose it. One final thing. It has become the most favorite tactic for disgruntled members to use. Reporting the church that they went to the IRS. Having lawyers write and say, we've noticed that you've been holding yourself out as tax exempt and you're not tax exempt. And we're going to talk, and we're trying to decide, do we report you to the Revenue Service or can we negotiate this with you? Number one point of the negotiation is always, Pastor, you resign and leave. Because if you don't, we're going to feel obligated to turn this in. They use it as a blackmail. Now, we've encountered that many, many times. So you go on the internet, there's all kinds of information from disgruntled groups against churches about how to do this. By the way, they're not just doing it to our churches, they're doing it to all kinds of churches. But it has become a favorite tactic in order to create a lot of grief. One last thing before we get on to the final points. Your people will be upset if you lose your tax exemption because they all get audited. All of your givers. You see, they were giving money on the basis that you're tax exempt, and they were taking charitable deductions. If you're not tax exempt, they're not entitled to those charitable deductions. And so they get audited back normally 3 to 5 years, and with those audits and the things that go with them, they end up having to give money. And when your people find out on being audited by the IRS because of how our church handled tax exemption, it is normally a very upsetting event in the church. Most people rank having brain surgery right up there with an IRS audit. They don't like it. And the bottom line is this becomes this serious issue. Here's the first point we want to cover today in keeping your church tax exempt. As never before, your tax exemption hinges on your constitution and bylaws. You have to have comprehensive, exceptionally good constitution and bylaws. You say, but we're a church, right? We're tax exempt. No, you are not tax exempt in America because you're a church. You can be a perfectly legitimate church, holding services, having a sign, opening it to the public, and anybody who would come by and say, that is absolutely a church, no question about it. But that does not entitle you to be tax exempt. A church has to do 7 things, and you have to do all of them if you're going to be tax exempt. The first thing when they come in and check you is they are going to ask you, do you know the 7 things you're legally required to do to be tax exempt as a church? And by the way, this applies to any ministry, a Christian school. Our ministry, the Christian Law Association, is tax exempt. We have to do these 7 things. Crown College has to do these 7 things. Temple Baptist Church has to do these 7 things. You drive by the church and you say, boy, that's a church. Being a church does not make them tax exempt. The fact you have a mission organization doesn't make you tax exempt. Christian school. You have to do the 7 things. And they want to know, do you know them? Because you won't do any of them by accident. The key one that they go after first and foremost is we want to see your bylaws. We want to see what's called your Constitution and bylaws. Now, this document was irrelevant up until about 30 years ago. Most churches had one somewhere. They couldn't find it much of the time. Nobody paid a lick of attention to it. Then, when it became the foundation of tax exemption, it has grown in complication and in significance dramatically. It hinges everything now. Here's what it has to have in it. It has to describe accurately what you do and how you do it. And a major part of that is it has to describe what do you believe. What are your belief structures? Do you have that in that document? When someone reads it without you commenting on it, does it describe what we do and how we do it? Most Constitution and bylaws in yesteryear were 2 or 3 pages. Now I can promise you yours will be 30, 40 pages because it has to describe a lot of things. If the document does not accurately describe what you do and how you do it, you are not tax exempt. So getting that document right, keeping it up to date, making it comprehensive is super, super important. When the feds come in, the first thing they ask for is that document. And we have to ask people, is your document accurate? Is it comprehensive? And if the answer is, well, I don't think so, I have to tell people we are in a lot of trouble. The fact you have the document does not save you. It has to be accurate, describing what you do and how you do it. So I want to encourage you, whatever you do, make sure you have that document properly set up. Now, in that document, in this session, we want to cover some critical things. And by the way, if you need, we have a sample document we will give you to use to start as a template. It'll help you get one going. It'll give you something to help check, and we'll give that to you for free. Our ministry, we have lawyers expertly trained in these matters. They will help you go through and get yours up to speed. Don't sit here and say, how am I going to do this? We will help you get it done. We have helped hundreds and hundreds, and I think I can say thousands of churches get their document up to speed. By the way, this document will need adjustment periodically on an ongoing basis, because as issues come up that require different belief attention, you're going to want to make sure your document covers it and it's in there. Let's talk about some things that are brand new that need to be in there. Number one, your document needs to cover the new gender issues. The new gender issues. What do we do when someone comes in and says, I want to join the church, I'm a born-again, Bible-believing Christian, and I used to be a man and now I'm a woman? Well, what does the document say? Does the document cover that issue? Now, we have language on all these gender issues, but I want to warn you, it is imperative that it be in your document because your tax exemption hinges on it, and your right to exclude somebody depends on it. So the gender issues have become incredibly sensitive. Brother Greg Boyle is here from the West Coast, his church in the state of Washington. All of this stuff spawned heavily off of the West Coast, but now it has gone and flooded the country. And we're having challenges on this in Ohio and Kentucky and Florida and Mississippi and Alabama, people coming in. A dear friend of mine who's here at this meeting had a lady attending his church, and the lady was there for about a year and came up and said, I'd like to have an appointment with you, Pastor. And he said, sure. And she said, I want to join the church. I want to sing in the choir. And he said, well, I'll be fine. We need to make sure you give us a clear gospel testimony. And the lady said, and you should understand, sometimes I'm a man and sometimes I'm a woman. Now, I've only come to the church as a woman. But sometimes and at work, sometimes I'm back and forth. And so this preacher said, well, what were you when you were born? He said, well, I was a man. And he said, you mean we've had a man in our women's restroom? And the guy says, no, no, no. When I come as a woman, I'm a woman. But when I come as a man, I'm a man. Your church is going to deal with this issue. It's breaking out. The corporate world has accepted that. Now the world of the public at large is accepting that. And it's coming to our churches. Put this in your notes. 2/3 of the churches in America accept that. 2/3. Not quite 70%. Now, you do not have to accept it. But we need comprehensive language in your document about that. They are the gender issues. And by the way, it's every which way you can imagine. Transgender, cross-gender. We're having, if the statistics are right, 90,000 sex changes in America annually. You're going to have it knock at your door. We get calls regularly on this. And what you need to do is define in your document, this is what we believe, this is what we hold to. Now remember, you don't have to be tax exempt to have a church, but you're going to have to pay the government an awful lot of money. And most churches can simply not afford to give up tax exemption. And once you start paying on the property, all kinds of sales tax, excise taxes, income taxes, it mushrooms in a hurry. I don't know if you heard the president's speech probably a month ago, maybe a little more, when they were talking about we need all these rich Americans to be paying more of their, quote, fair share. And then he added, and he's done this several times, and we need these tax exempts that shouldn't be tax exempt to start paying their fair share. That's bespeaking largely to churches. And so you're going to have this issue come up in your document. You want the gender issues covered. You can style it with your own wording any way that you're comfortable. We will give you sample wording to deal with. You can go to other ministries. Brother Sexton's stuff is excellent. Brother Paul Chappell's stuff. Brother Trieber, who preached last night. We've worked with all these ministries. And their documents are not the same, but they're excellent. And they will be glad to give you sample documents that you can look at, but make sure you get that issue covered before it becomes an issue. Second thing that you want in this document, to be very clear, is a cleaning of the rolls. A cleaning of the rolls. How long can somebody be a member and not come? You want your rolls cleaned. When we have issues on this, somebody says, well, our church has 2,000 members and we have 250 in attendance. You're in a lot of trouble. You want an automatic roll cleaning procedure. Put stars all over this. In recent cases, this has become super critical. If somebody isn't coming, don't give them a vote in how this ministry can be controlled. I have this with preachers all the time. The voting power in the church, the preacher never sees them. Some of them don't even know the preacher, but we left them on the church roll. Courts will vote all of them. Courts will bring them in. You want to make it, whatever your status is. The one that's in our document, if somebody doesn't show up for a year, their name is automatically. How many of you think asking somebody to come once a year is not a lot to ask? Okay. By the way, if they're not coming, there's a reason. And why give them the same vote the pastor has? Why give them the same vote the most faithful member has? Okay. You want to make sure that automatically, it isn't a procedure you go through, it automatically happens. That language is in all the sample documents. Make sure that you have what we call a roll cleaning procedure. Now, it always says that for shut-ins and missionaries and college students that are away, and there's all kinds of exemptions where the pastor can keep their name on the roll. But make sure if somebody is not coming that you have them off. This has become, because of some recent cases, extraordinarily important, because what the courts are saying, we are going to treat inactive members when it's time to vote as members. They are still members. You didn't say they weren't members. You just said they're inactive, and they still have the same vote. Make sure that you have it where you can clean them. Any questions so far? Number one, the gender issues. Number two, the roll cleaning. Anybody with a question on that? Yes, sir. Most churches do it through Sunday school attendance. They can tell. You have got to shepherd your roll, okay? And when we go into court, and I trust you wouldn't say this, but you simply say, well, we don't know who comes and doesn't come. Most churches know who's coming, and they know who's not coming, okay? I promise you, Brother Sexton knows who's showing up and who isn't showing up. And that's a large number of people to look over. But when we tell them we don't know, the court's going to vote them all. And you don't want the voting authority in the church outside of the people who are coming. By the way, can somebody be a member and never, ever give? Not only not show up, but never support. Now, I've had a lot of judges ask me over the years, what does a person have to do to get kicked out of this place? You're telling me they don't ever have to come, they don't ever have to give, and you give them the same vote that the pastor has, that the most faithful member has. The court finds that incredulous, but under these new property rulings, they're giving them the vote. So you want to make sure that that cleaning procedure is well in place. Yes, sir.
I believe our church hasn't stated that they have to come so many times in the past 6 months or something, but they're still a member. Are you saying that these explicitly say
They're off the church roll. Do you want to give people, now if you say, we don't care if they never come, then they're perfectly welcome to vote and control the place. But you understand, most of the time, the people who aren't showing up way, way, way outnumber the people who are showing up. So what you're saying is, we will let the voting authority of this church rest with people who don't even like us and never come. How many of you think that's strange? Hold your hand. Yeah, okay. Well, you want to fix that. Yes, sir.
So if their clause that you recommend is 1 year, and we have this huge swell, the CEOs, Christmas and Easter only, then we're still in the same boat.
Yeah, as to those number of people. Now, you can clamp it way down. We have churches that make it where you have to come a certain number of times within 6 months. Okay? Make it whatever you are comfortable with, but get that roll cleaned up. And make it automatic. Yes, sir. You want to remove them from the roll. That's where we're having trouble. Okay? For a long time, courts accepted this inactive member status. But then, because it's never defined well, they're going to put you on the stand and say, are they a member or not? And the answer is no, but are they a member? And the answer is yes. That's what's hanging us up. Okay, so what I tell everybody, now, you can style this any way you desire to. You have an enormous amount of latitude. But you want to make sure, because now this has become an incredibly touchy issue for our tax exemption. Question here.
You can't be definitive in your language about being a voting member.
You can,
But the courts
are coming in and saying
they're ruling us
they have, here, and I want to make sure that I don't confuse you. The courts are ruling that church membership is a property right. They have an interest, a property interest, an intangible property interest in that church. And for you to take it away from them or make it of no value requires due process. So this has become very, and by the way, when you have disgruntled members, now you say, well, our church has never had anybody get disgruntled. Just stay at it a little longer, all right? Every ministry that I know of has had disgruntles, every one, okay? And the bottom line is, once they get together, now these new property right issues, they go after your tax exemption. And it's based on what you did to that with their property right. So you just want to make sure your roll cleaning procedure is automatic and thorough, okay? Now, if you say, no, we're perfectly willing to let them vote, that's okay. But then you got to let them vote. And most churches do not want people voting who never come and never give.
Is there a favorite terminology for a former member?
We give you a number of suggestions in our document, okay? And it's a very sensitive issue. Understand, most churches use those numbers for bragging rights. You know, how large your church? Oh, we have 2,000 members. We have 1,500 members. And what it was really, and that's an accurate statement, there are on the roll that number, okay? Well, how many are there Sunday morning? Oh, 185. Well, you got a huge number of people who were a member at one time who don't come anymore. And there's a reason they don't come, and don't hand them a vote, and don't let them get at your tax exemption. Membership gives them a right, a privilege. You do not want to hand that out casually. So, and now especially with this new legal climate of how they're being treated. Anyone else with a question? Yes, sir.
Just a comment. We went to 90 days, and terrifically a great help. And like you said, they're automatically, there's no vote. They're automatic.
Oh yeah, you don't want to vote. You automatic, and I hope I keep repeating that. Now, all the language we give you and the alternatives we give you, all the ministries I recommended, if you want to look at theirs, they're all automatic. Okay. And by the way, these ministries, like Brother Sexton's, has had to change things dramatically over the years. These issues have caught everybody. Yes? Yes, this was going to be the last point, but let me, since he jumped to that, bring it up again. Remember, to change your document, you got to find out what do you have to do to change the document. Put this in your notes. Make the change easy. It's unbelievable to me, the things we see in old-time documents, what they were thinking, I don't know. You know, the change has to be read aloud for 52 Sundays. That's a year. Well, somebody didn't want this document changed. You know, you can only change it by a vote of 90% of the people. We've seen them where the change has to be unanimous. Listen, no Baptist church votes anything unanimous. I mean, there's somebody there that just doesn't want to go along with the flow. The bottom line is, make sure that you look, what do you have to do? He's exactly correct. Yes, sir.
So the courts look at the church members like stockholders.
Yes, Now, stockholders is the wrong word, but it's so delicate. You're on my next point. You want language in the document. This is key, that they are not property possessors. You becoming a member here does not give you a property interest. That has to be treated straight up. And we give you very comprehensive language on that. That they are not property interest holders. We do. Yes. 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 Now, by the way, you should use our document as a template to get started. You should look at other good documents we can recommend to you. Talk to our lawyers. They'll help talk you through. That's our ministry, helping talk you through what do you want this to read. Let us help you wordsmith the document the way you wish to have it massaged. By the way, work on these documents is very hard work. If you think you're going to sit down and knock this out in an afternoon, it takes a ton of prayer, a lot of discussion, because getting people to understand what you're trying to do and the why. These are the new critical tax-exempt issues. We're not even dealing with the function side. We're not dealing with the spiritual side. We're dealing with the tax-exempt side. Now, the function and the spiritual, candidly, are way more important than the tax-exempt. But they asked us in this session to deal with the tax-exempt issue. So that's what we want to do. Anyone else with a question on this so far? Next, yes, sir.
Word he used just then, if you want to make it a tithing member, you're going to be asked on stand, was so-and-so allowed to vote? How much they give last year? What's their salary?
That is correct.
Give a tithe, and if they didn't give a tithe and were allowed to vote, then this person should be allowed to vote.
Now, in those cases, what we require is that they give an affirmation that indeed they tithed on their income, and then you determine whether it was the net or the gross and put that language in. Churches that get burned on this all go to that because they say, you messed us all up once. We're not going to hand you the stick to beat us up a second time. We're going to get this language tightened down. The church that so influenced my life, the Cleveland Baptist Church, we would vote people in that we didn't even know. We would just say, they've come forward, everybody in favor say aye, and I didn't even see them walk forward, and I'd say, yeah, amen, let's have them be a member. Because we didn't think we were giving them anything. They were just becoming a member. Then all this legal stuff started fermenting. So now we have to treat it accordingly. Next thing that you want in this document, make sure that this is here, okay, is that you are going to protect the leadership. That the leadership is going to be covered by appropriate protections if they're challenged. That needs to be in the document, because if you try to protect the leadership with church resources and that's not in there, you lose your tax exemption. So you want it in the document. Somebody brings a lawsuit against our deacons, against our pastor, etc. We have the right to defend them, okay, and cover them. And you want those issues very clearly spelled out. Put a big star here. Make sure your church has what is called E&O insurance. It's errors and omissions. Some people like to call it malpractice. That's not really the right word, but it's E&O insurance. You absolutely want this. It's normally not very expensive, but I tell everybody I would never sit on a board that did not have E&O insurance. Somebody's going to take a swing at you. And if it's not in the document that ministry can defend you, you are on your own. And a very nominal lawsuit can cost a pastor or a deacon $100,000 to defend themselves. And they're not thinking that. They're not thinking that I would have to come, and many of them can't come up with those kinds of resources. You want to make sure that you have it in the document where you can defend them and where there's E&O insurance. Last thing for the document, then we're going to jump to one other subject on tax exemption. Last thing that you want in this document is the ability to change it easily. Now, this is the issue this brother over here brought up. You're going to change this document many, many times. I can promise you, ministries that are staying up on this are putting changes in their document every other year for sure, but many of them are having to change it yearly, because as the law keeps changing, you're going to have to respond. And this is a document that is your tax-exempt status. It's what gives you the right to tell people we don't pay taxes legally, and people can give money to our ministry and receive a charitable exemption. In closing, let's write two more keys down that are extraordinarily sensitive right now. The next one is, what are we allowed to do in the political arena? What are we allowed to do? We have a document out on this. We'll be glad to send it to you again. If you just say, please send that to me, we'll make sure it gets in your hands. The church cannot endorse candidates. Now, listen carefully. You have every right to endorse politicians until they declare their candidacy. So, if you know that somebody's thinking of running and you can stand up and say, boy, this would be a great governor, that's perfectly all legal. It is once they declare a candidacy that these rules set in. And so you want it in your document that we do not do that, and you need to be very careful that your ministry doesn't endorse candidates. Can we have candidates come stop by and introduce themselves? The answer is absolutely yes, as long as you let all of them do it. As long as you let all of them do it. So if you let one to your pulpit, you got to let all of them if they want to come. Can we do voter registration? Absolutely. Voter registration is not a violation of your tax-exempt status. Strongly recommend you tell all your people to get registered. Our experience in our best churches, 40% of the people are not registered to vote. In our average church, under half are registered to vote. They can't vote if they want to, bottom line. So make sure. One more thing here. A pastor can endorse a candidate, can, as long as it's clear he's doing it personally. And they now have some special language that must be on any endorsement you give. Must be on it. We will give you that language. It's in our documents. We tell you how to do it. And we give you the exact precise language. So can a pastor individually endorse a candidate? Yes, he can, if he uses this special language. And we will give it to you. Just make sure when you do it that that language is employed. And what the language says is that all titles are for identification purposes only. And what it spells out is that you're doing this, and while you're a pastor, this should not imply that the church is doing it. And you have the right to endorse candidates. A pastor in Las Vegas went the last time and endorsed a whole list of candidates. And lo and behold, every candidate he endorsed won. Now everybody wants his endorsement because they found out that he had a lot of influence. You can absolutely do it. I just want to caution you, when a pastor endorses a candidate and the candidate loses, the guy you didn't endorse has a pretty long memory. All right? And so you have to decide, do I want to be in that arena or not? One last one, and we're done for your tax exemption. They have severely tightened all of the rules on what is called unearned income. Unearned income. Let me make this summary. It's in all our materials, again, that we give to you. The bottom line is the church can give gifts to the pastor if it's declared as income, can give gifts to staff if it's declared as income, but they cannot give gifts that aren't declared as income. That voids your tax-exempt status. So the bottom line is, if you say, we want to give our pastor a love gift and send him on a nice trip, and we're going to give him $5,000. Perfectly legal, but you must declare it as income. If you don't declare it as income, under these new standards, you lose your tax exemption. So they're going to go back and try to find out, did you hand out money that was not treated as income? Make sure that you have that. How many of you say, I learned something in the last few minutes here a little bit? Now, please don't walk out of here and go buy a bottle of Rolaids and start fretting over this stuff. All of this is fixable. Our ministry, for free, is delighted to help you. If you do not get our newsletter, please, I beg you, let us send you the newsletter so you can pray for these. If you would like these materials that are free, please go to Steve Kluth in the back. Just give him a tract or any piece of paper with your name and address on it. We'll be delighted to do it. God bless you, folks. You're dismissed.